You ever hear a story so wild, so unbelievable, that you gotta stop and ask yourself, how did they think they could get away with this? Because that's exactly what happened here. A black man owned a lake, not just the land around it, not just the water rights. He owned the entire thing, shoreline to dam, every drop of water under the sun. But when a wealthy homeowners association got greedy, they decided they didn't care about history, didn't care about law, and sure didn't care about him. They built 139 luxury vacation cabins right on his water, on his lake. And what did he do? He dropped the dam, letting nature swallow everything they'd stolen. But before we get to that explosive moment, you need to understand how this story began. It was early summer in the rolling hills of North Carolina. The air smelled of honeysuckle and pine resin, heavy with that humid sweetness only the South carries in June. Cicadas buzzed like tiny generators in the trees, and the sunlight danced across the wide glassy surface of Lake Ashton. Marcus Reed leaned against the railing of his old cedar porch, a chipped coffee mug in his hand, staring out at the water. The lake stretched wide and deep, calm now, but alive with memory. His grandfather had built the dam with his own hands in 1948. Stone by stone, log by log, the family's land, once swamp and floodplain, had been reshaped into a sanctuary, a lake that fed fish, gave waterfowl a home, and carved out a piece of independence in a world that didn't want black families owning much of anything. Marcus had grown up here, learned to swim in that lake, learned to cast a fishing line with his father, learned to steer the small aluminum John boat that creaked as he rode out into the early morning mist. To Marcus, this wasn't just property. It was legacy. It was survival. But legacies have a way of drawing eyes, and not all eyes are kind. That morning, as Marcus sipped his coffee, he noticed movement across the lake. Trucks, bulldozers. He squinted against the rising sun, setting his mug down. The rumble carried across the water, a low growl that didn't belong. He grabbed his binoculars from the windowsill and raised them. What he saw made his stomach tighten. Crews in neon vests, concrete mixers, lumber stacked like Lego bricks. And behind it all, a gleaming white sign, Ashton Woods Luxury Lakeside Cabins, a community by Cresswell Development Group. Marcus's jaw clenched. He lowered the binoculars, muttering under his breath, "No, no, no. Hell no." Because that stretch of land, it wasn't theirs. The hoe from the neighboring subdivision, mostly wealthy transplants from up north who wanted their retirement haven, had been circling for years, always asking, always hinting, always trying to buy rights to the water. They wanted a playground, a showcase. They wanted to turn Lake Ashton into their private resort. And every time, Marcus told them the same thing. The lake is mine, my family's, not for sale. But now, standing on his porch, Marcus watched as the sound of nail guns popped across the water. Cabins rising on pilings, built right into the shallows, as if the hoe had decided to ignore him entirely. He felt the heat crawl up his neck, hotter than the morning sun. That's when his phone buzzed. A text from his cousin Angela, the one who kept an eye on the county records. "Marcus, did you see? They filed permits for lakeside improvements. But the map shows your water. Call me." His pulse hammered in his ears. You see, what the hoe didn't realize, or maybe didn't care to admit, was that this lake wasn't public. It wasn't state-owned. It wasn't some gray area recreation zone. It was private. 100% private. Marcus had the deeds, the surveys, the titles, everything in order. His grandfather had made sure of it, filing paperwork back in the 1950s when local officials tried to deny a black man the right to own water. The family had fought, and they had won. And now, these outsiders were just building cabins on it? Like he was invisible? He slammed his mug down on the porch rail, porcelain cracked against wood. "Not today," he whispered. The screen door creaked as he stepped inside, grabbing his keys from the hook. His old Ford pickup roared to life, exhaust coughing as he floored it down the dirt road toward the dam. Dust curled up behind him, golden in the morning light. He pulled onto the gravel shoulder near the construction site. Workers glanced up, some with hard hats tilted back, others wiping sweat from their brows. Marcus stepped out, boots crunching on gravel, his presence sharp as a warning bell. "Who's in charge here?" he called out, voice steady but firm. A foreman with a clipboard glanced over, annoyed. "Can I help you, sir?" "Yeah," Marcus said. "You can tell me why you're building cabins on my lake." The man blinked, then smirked. "Your lake? This development's been approved by the Ashton Woods HOA. We've got permits, paperwork, everything lined up." Marcus stepped closer, his shadow falling across the clipboard. "You got paperwork for the land, but not the water. That water's mine." The foreman laughed, a short, dismissive chuckle. "Sir, maybe you should check again. Who owns this side? Folks don't just own lakes." Marcus's eyes hardened. This one does. He could feel the eyes of the workers on him. Some curious, some cautious. But the foreman just waved him off, turning back to bark orders at his crew. "Sir, I've got a job to do. You want to complain, take it up with the county." Marcus stood there, chest rising and falling, rage mixing with disbelief. Because this wasn't just arrogance. This was theft, plain and simple. And if the county was in on it, or even looking the other way, he knew this fight wasn't going to be easy. But Marcus Reed wasn't a man who backed down. He climbed back into his truck, gripping the wheel so hard his knuckles turned white. He drove toward town, dust trailing behind him, already knowing his next move. This wasn't over, not by a long shot. Marcus's truck rattled down the 2-lane road into Ashton County. The sun was higher now, burning off the mist that had hugged the lake earlier. His jaw worked as he chewed at the inside of his cheek, replaying what that smug foreman said. "Folks don't just own lakes." Marcus gripped the steering wheel tighter. "My grandfather didn't bleed, sweat, and fight through segregation to be told this lake don't belong to us." At the county building, the air conditioning blasted cold against the sticky heat outside. Marcus strode down the tiled hallway, boots echoing. Folks behind the glass at the clerk's office glanced up, already knowing who he was. "Morning, Mr. Reed," said Janice, a clerk with glasses sliding down her nose. "What brings you in?" Marcus planted his hands on the counter. "You seen these permits for Ashton Woods? They're building cabins right into my lake." Janice's mouth tightened. She shifted uncomfortably in her chair. "Yes, sir. Those permits came through last week. They're listed as shoreline improvements." "Shoreline improvements?" Marcus barked a short laugh. "Those cabins aren't on the shore. They're in the water. Water that's deeded to me." Janice leaned forward, lowering her voice. "Marcus, I don't doubt you. Everybody in this county knows your family owns that lake. But these folks came with lawyers. Big city attorneys from Raleigh. They say the HOA has rights through some community covenant." Marcus's nostrils flared. "A covenant don't override a deed. You know that." "I know," Janice whispered. "But they've got the county commissioners convinced otherwise. Maybe you ought to talk directly to them." Marcus straightened up. "Don't worry. I will." Walking into the commissioner's meeting room felt like stepping into enemy territory. Polished oak table, framed photos of smiling white men shaking hands, a faint smell of lemon polish and old paper. Behind the table sat Commissioner Harold Gaines, silver-haired and heavyset, tapping a pen against a folder. He looked up, feigning surprise. "Marcus Reed. Didn't expect to see you here today." "You should have," Marcus said flatly. "I just came from my property. Your buddies at Ashton Woods are dropping cabins straight into my lake. You signed off on this?" Gaines cleared his throat, buying time. "Well, Marcus, the whole presented documents showing lies." Marcus cut in. "That water ain't theirs. It never was. You know my grandfather's deed is airtight." The tension thickened. The other commissioners exchanged glances, shifting in their leather chairs. Gaines sighed, folding his hands. "Marcus, look, times are changing. That lake has potential. Tourism, revenue for the county, jobs for folks. We can't keep everything tied up in one family's hands forever." Marcus leaned over the table, eyes burning. "This ain't about job. It's about power. You're letting them steal from me because you think I can't fight back. For a moment, the room went dead quiet. Only the hum of the fluorescent lights. Then Gaines smirked, thin and smug. You're welcome to file a legal complaint. But I should warn you, Cresswell Development's attorneys don't lose. And the county's already moving forward. Marcus stood there, fists clenched at his sides. He wanted to shout, to flip the damn table. But he forced himself to breathe. Slow, controlled. Because anger was what they expected. They wanted the angry black man stereotype. They wanted an excuse to dismiss him. So instead, he straightened his shoulders and spoke with a voice steady as steel. You just made the biggest mistake of your career, Gaines. You think this is over paperwork? You're about to find out what happens when you push a man too far. And with that, Marcus turned on his heel and walked out. On the drive back, memories surfaced. His grandfather's voice, deep and gravelly, telling him stories when he was a boy. Marcus, he'd say, sitting on the porch with a jug of sweet tea. This lake is freedom. Don't you forget it. They'll try to take it from you one day. But you stand your ground. This water runs with our blood. Marcus remembered the stories of the 1950s. How county officials tried to seize the land under eminent domain to hand over to white developers. How his grandfather hired a black lawyer from Durham who fought tooth and nail, uncovering every racist loophole they tried to pull. How the case made headlines. Negro farmer wins right to own private lake. The Reeds had been targeted ever since. Offers, threats, harassment, and now, this. By the time Marcus pulled back onto his dirt driveway, the sun was sliding west. His cousin Angela's car was already parked out front, dust coating the windshield. She stood on the porch, arms folded, her expression sharp. Did you talk to them? She asked. Yeah, Marcus said, slamming the truck door. They think money and lawyers give them more rights than a deed. They ain't backing down. Angela sighed, shaking her head. I warned you, cousin. These folks don't play fair. They've got connections. Judges, commissioners, maybe even the sheriff. Marcus walked up the steps, lowering his voice. Then we stopped playing fair too. Angela's eyes widened. Marcus, what are you thinking? I'm thinking, he said slowly. That lake is ours. And if they want to build their cabins over my water, I've got the one thing they don't. Control of the dam. Angela stared at him. Marcus, you wouldn't. He didn't answer. He just looked out at the fading sunlight glinting off the water. The cabins were already creeping along the shoreline, their frames rising like unwanted weeds. Angela stepped closer, lowering her voice. Before you do something drastic, let me dig deeper. I still got friends at the records office. Maybe we can catch them on fraud. Maybe we can shut this down legally. Marcus finally met her eyes. You've got 1 week, Angela. 1 week. But if they keep building, he let the words hang, heavy and unspoken. That night, Marcus sat on the dam alone. The water lapped gently at the concrete, frogs croaking in the reeds. He felt the cool night breeze on his skin, tasted the bitterness of anger like metal in his mouth. He pulled a flashlight from his pocket and shined it along the control gate. Rusted but sturdy. He'd oiled those gears every spring, kept them in working order, just like his grandfather taught him. With one turn of the wheel, he could release the water. He imagined it, cascading out in a roaring flood, ripping through pilings, swallowing cabins whole. Nature reclaiming what greedy hands had stolen. Marcus closed his eyes. Not yet, he told himself, but soon. The next morning, Marcus woke to the sound of hammers cracking across the lake. He dragged himself to the porch with a cup of black coffee, eyes narrowing. Overnight, the cabins had multiplied, frames stretching like skeletons, roofs already half built. It was moving too fast, too clean, too coordinated. This wasn't some sloppy hole project. This was a full-scale development backed by deep pockets. By noon, Angelo was back at his place, spreading documents across his kitchen table. Look at this, she said, stabbing a finger at a permit. They filed these as shoreline recreational structures. That means docks, maybe a boat ramp, not cabins. They misclassified the whole thing. Marcus leaned over, scanning the pages. So, that's fraud, right? That should kill the project. Angela sighed, running a hand through her braids. It should, but the county signed off anyway, which means they're either incompetent or complicit. Marcus's stomach churned. Both. Just then, the sound of tires crunching on gravel broke the silence. A black SUV rolled up his driveway, gleaming in the sunlight. On the side was the gold seal of the Ashton County Sheriff's Office. Marcus's jaw set. Here we go. The SUV door opened, and Sheriff Donnelly stepped out. Tall, pale, and broad-shouldered. His mirrored sunglasses reflected Marcus like a distorted image. "Morning, Marcus," the sheriff said casually, as if he just dropped by for a chat. "We need to talk." Marcus crossed his arms. "About what?" Donnelly hooked his thumbs into his belt. "Got some calls from the Ashton Woods HOA. They say you've been harassing construction crews, threatening folks." Marcus let out a sharp laugh. "Threatening? I asked them why they're building on my lake. That's not harassment. That's called owning property." The sheriff's smile was thin, almost rehearsed. "Well, here's the deal. You interfere again, I'll have to cite you for trespassing." Marcus's eyes darkened. "Trespassing? On my own land?" "On their development site," Donnelly corrected smoothly. Angela slammed her hand on the table. "That site is illegal, Sheriff. You know good and well Marcus owns the water. I've seen the deeds myself." Donnelly didn't flinch. He just shifted his sunglasses. "Look, I don't make the rules. County approved the permits. As far as the law is concerned, the HOA's got rights here, and I suggest you don't stir the pot." Marcus stepped closer, his voice low and tight. "You tell your buddies over there they picked the wrong man to steal from. I'm not rolling over." Donnelly held his gaze for a long, tense moment. Then he leaned in, just enough so Angela couldn't hear. "Careful, Marcus," he murmured. "You start a fight with people like this, you'll lose more than a lake." And with that, he turned, climbed back into his SUV, and rolled down the driveway. The kitchen felt heavy after he left. Angela was pacing, anger flashing in her eyes. "You hear that? He's not even pretending to be neutral. He's protecting them." Marcus dropped into a chair, running a hand over his face. "That sheriff's been in their pocket for years. Whole bankrolls his re-election. Doesn't matter what's right. He'll do what they tell him." Angela slammed a folder shut. "Then we need to outthink them. File an injunction. Go to the press. Something." Marcus shook his head slowly. "The press in this county won't touch it. They're all eating out of the same hand." The week dragged on like a bad dream. Every day, Marcus heard saws whining, nails firing, voices shouting orders. Cabins sprouted along the shoreline, bright wood and shiny glass reflecting on his water like insults carved into the earth. Neighbors started calling him too. "Marcus." They put up no trespassing signs along the lake. Said we can't fish anymore. "Marcus, they're draining runoff into your water, killing the catfish." Every complaint was another dagger in his chest. But the worst came one evening when he found an envelope tucked under his door. No stamp, no return address. Inside was a typed letter. "Mr. Reed, for the good of the community, we strongly suggest you sell your water rights to Ashton Woods. This is your chance to cooperate and walk away peacefully. If you resist, consequences will follow." At the bottom was a signature, Cresswell Development Group. Marcus sat on his porch that night with the letter clenched in his fist. The crickets chirped. The cabins glowed faintly across the lake, lights flickering as crews worked late into the night. He felt rage coil in his chest like a sprained wound too tight. "They think they can scare me. They think money gives them power. They don't know who they're dealing with." Angela's car headlights appeared, bouncing down the dirt road. She climbed out with a thick folder under her arm. "Marcus," she said breathlessly, "I've got something." Inside, she spread papers across the table again. "Look here. The HOA's permits don't just misclassify the cabins. They contradict each other. One permit says docks. Another says recreation huts. Another says maintenance sheds. It's a web of lies. If we get this in front of a real judge, it could shut them down. Marcus leaned forward, fire sparking in his eyes. So we sue? Angela hesitated. We could, but lawsuits take time. Months, maybe years. And while we're fighting in court, those cabins will be finished. People will move in. By then, the damage will be done. Marcus slammed his hand on the table. The wood rattled. Then maybe the law ain't the answer. Angela's face hardened. Marcus, no. Don't even say it. You open that dam. You'll flood everything. Roads, farms, maybe even people's homes downstream. You'll be the one they call criminal. Marcus looked out the window at the dark water glistening under the moon. You think they'll stop? You think they'll ever respect the law when it's us holding the deed? They'll twist it, bury it by it. Only thing they respect is power. Angela stepped closer, her voice trembling. I'm begging you, cousin. Just give me more time. Let me find a judge who isn't bought. Let me find a way. Marcus turned, his eyes cold. Time is the one thing we don't have. Every nail they drive is another line they cross. And when they cross too many, he trailed off. But the silence said enough. Later that night, Marcus stood at the dam again. The will gleamed faintly in his flashlight's beam. His hand hovered over it, trembling with the weight of choice. He could end it. Tonight. But he pulled back, fists clenched. Not yet. Not until they pushed him past the point of no return. He looked out at the water, dark and endless. You're mine, he whispered to the lake, and I'll protect you. 2 days later, Marcus woke to shouting across the water. At first, he thought it was just another construction crew barking orders. But when he stepped onto his porch, he froze. On the far shore, men in suits were standing with clipboards, pointing directly at his dam. Bright orange survey flags fluttered in the breeze along the embankment, marking lines across his property like scars. Marcus's stomach dropped. They're coming for the dam itself. He jumped in his truck and drove around the lake. Dust kicked up behind his tires, the roar of his engine louder than the cicadas. When he pulled up, a group of surveyors were setting equipment on his land. And standing at the center, smirking like a fox in a henhouse, was a man Marcus had only seen on glossy real estate brochures. Richard Cresswell, CEO of Cresswell Development Group. Cresswell turned as Marcus slammed his truck door. He wore a tailored suit, spotless loafers sinking slightly in the mud. His grin was wide, teeth gleaming. Mr. Reed, finally we meet. I've been hearing so much about you. Marcus stalked forward, fists clenched. You've got no business here. This is my property. Cresswell spread his arms theatrically, as if he were a preacher blessing the land. Oh, but it's our future. This dam? It's outdated, unsafe, a liability to the community. We're filing for an emergency condemnation. Once it's removed, Lake Ashton will become public water. The words hit Marcus like a punch. Condemnation? You can't condemn what you don't own. Cresswell's smile didn't waver. Watch us. The county's already on board. Once the state environmental office hears about these safety risks, your little deed won't matter. Marcus's voice rose. This dam's been here 75 years without issue. My grandfather built it by hand. Don't stand there and lie about safety. Cresswell stepped closer, lowering his voice. Marcus, let's be adults. Sell to me. I'll make you rich. More money than you'll ever see otherwise. All you have to do is sign. Marcus spat into the dirt between them. This dam don't have a price, and neither does my family's dignity. For the first time, Cresswell's smile faltered. His eyes hardened, cold and shark-like. Careful, Mr. Reed. You think you're holding power with that dam, but you're just a man standing in the way of progress. And progress always wins. Marcus's voice was low, dangerous. So do floods. Cresswell's jaw tightened. For a moment, the two men stood locked in silence, the weight of generations hanging between them. Then Cresswell snapped his fingers, and the surveyors began packing up. We'll be seeing you soon, he said, sliding into a black SUV. Marcus stood there, chest heaving. His dam, his lake, his grandfather's blood in every stone. And now they wanted to erase it. Erase him. That night, Angela arrived with news. She dropped a newspaper on his table, her eyes blazing. Front page headline: County seeks removal of unsafe Reed Dam. Marcus stared at the bold letters until they blurred. Beneath, a quote from Commissioner Gaines. The structure poses a clear risk to public safety and development. The county must act in the best interest of the community. Marcus slammed his fist onto the table. Best interest of the community? This lake fed our community for generations. They're just parroting Cresswell's lies. Angela nodded grimly. And here's the kicker. They've scheduled a public hearing next week. If they get enough support, they'll move to seize the dam under emergency powers. Marcus leaned back, the weight pressing down on him. So that's their game. First they steal the shoreline. Now they want to strip me of the dam. They won't stop until there's nothing left. Angela hesitated, then pulled another document from her folder. Marcus, I found something else. Cresswell's already selling pre-construction units. He's marketing those cabins online for $500,000 apiece. He's counting on that lake being his by the end of summer. Marcus's fists clenched so tight his knuckles popped. He's building a kingdom on my back. That evening, Marcus drove to the church at the edge of town. The community hall buzzed with voices. Neighbors, fishermen, small business owners, folks he'd known his whole life. When he walked in, the room quieted. All eyes turned to him. Pastor Green cleared his throat. Brother Marcus, we were just talking about what's happening with the lake. Folks are scared. That dam goes. Water level drops. Fish die off. Tourism dries up. Some of us lose everything. Marcus stepped forward, voice steady. Then we fight back. This lake don't just belong to me. It belongs to all of us who've lived off it, swum in it, prayed by it. My family may own the deed, but this water's in our blood. And I promise you, I won't let them take it. The room erupted in applause. People nodding, murmuring encouragement. But beneath the cheers, Marcus felt the pressure building. Because promises were easy. Delivering was another story. On the drive home, Marcus slowed as he passed the cabins again. One was already finished, lights glowing warm through the windows. He could see a family inside, laughing, drinking wine, toasting the view of the water, as if it had always been theirs. His chest tightened. He pulled to the side of the road, killing the engine. He sat there in silence, watching. Every laugh echoing across the water felt like a theft. Then his eyes drifted to the dam in the distance, the moonlight glinting off the steel gate. He whispered to himself, "Progress always wins, huh?" His hand curled into a fist. Not if I drop that dam first. That night, Marcus didn't sleep. He walked the shoreline with a lantern, tracing the paths his grandfather once walked. He ran his hands over the stones of the dam, feeling the rough edges, the cool concrete. He whispered his grandfather's words like a prayer. This lake is freedom. Don't you forget it. By dawn, he knew if the county and Cresswell wanted war, he'd give it to them, but on his terms. The morning of the county's public hearing, Marcus didn't bother ironing a shirt or putting on a tie. He came in the same way his grandfather would have: jeans, work boots, and a plaid shirt rolled at the sleeves. He wanted them to see exactly who they were trying to erase. The meeting room at Ashton County Hall was packed. Whole board members filled the front rows, all polished haircuts and pearl necklaces, whispering to each other like smug parishioners in church. Behind them sat Marcus's people, neighbors, fishermen, farmers, families who'd grown up around the lake. The divide was clear as a painted line. At the podium, Commissioner Gaines cleared his throat, his voice echoing over the mic. Ladies and gentlemen, today we address the status of the Reed Dam, a structure deemed unsafe and unsuitable for modern development. The county must determine whether removal is in the best interest of the community. Polite applause rippled from the whole side. Angela leaned close to Marcus, whispering, "They're stacking the deck. Watch who they call up." One by one, HOA representative spoke. A man in a pastel blazer complained about property values being tied to aesthetics. A woman with a clipped northern accent warned about the danger of flooding. Another, lips pursed, said, "Honestly, private ownership of an entire lake is antiquated. This is about equality." That word made Marcus's jaw tighten. Equality. As if stripping a black family of the only land they'd held for 3 generations was somehow fair. Finally, they called Marcus. He walked to the podium. The room hushed. "I've heard a lot about safety, about aesthetics, about progress," he began. His voice was calm, steady, but carried an edge. "But what I ain't heard is the truth. This dam has stood 75 years. Not once has it failed. Not once has it threatened this county. You call it unsafe? Show me the report." "You can't, because there isn't one." He leaned closer to the mic. "What this is really about is greed. My grandfather fought for this lake when y'all told him he wasn't fit to own a fishing pond. He stood against the same kind of folks trying to steal it now. You can build your cabins, you can buy your lawyers, but you cannot buy this water, because it's mine, and I'll defend it." The crowd erupted, his neighbors cheering, HOA members hissing, commissioners pounding for order. Gaines slammed his gavel. "That's enough, Mr. Reed. This board will deliberate." Marcus stepped back, locking eyes with Cresswell, who was seated smugly in the front. Cresswell smiled thinly, mouthing the words, "You're finished." Outside, the summer heat pressed down like a weight. Marcus was swarmed by neighbors. "You tell them, Marcus. They can't take it from us. We're with you, brother." For the first time in weeks, Marcus felt something stir. Not just anger, strength. Angela squeezed his arm. "They heard you. You shook the room. But don't be fooled, they'll still rule against you." Marcus nodded grimly. "Then we prepare." That night, Marcus called a meeting at his house. About 20 folks crowded onto his porch. Friends, cousins, fishermen, young men with fists full of frustration. Marcus stood before them, holding up the threatening letter he'd received. "This is what we're up against. They don't just want the cabins. They want the dam. And once they take that, we lose everything. Our homes, our water, our history. So I'm telling you now, I won't let that happen. Not while I'm breathing." A murmur of agreement swept through the crowd. "What you want us to do?" asked one of the younger men, Jamal. Marcus scanned their faces. "I need eyes on that construction day and night. Document everything. Every pipe they lay, every tree they cut. If they break one law, we'll catch it." Angela added, "And I'll handle the paperwork. Lawsuits, injunctions, whatever I can file, I will. We'll fight them on every front." But Marcus wasn't finished. He pointed toward the dam. "And if they think they can steal it all anyway, well, they'll find out what happens when a man's pushed too far." The crowd went quiet. They understood. Some nodded. Others shifted uneasily. Pastor Green finally spoke. "Brother Marcus, I believe in standing firm. But water is powerful. Once you let it go, you can't call it back." Marcus met his eyes. "Neither can I call back what they've taken. Sometimes power's the only language folks like them understand." In the days that followed, Marcus prepared. Quietly, carefully. He serviced the dam controls, greased the gears, tested the wheel. He checked the spillways, clearing debris. He measured water levels, calculating in his head what would happen if he opened the gates wide. Each creak of metal under his hand reminded him, this wasn't just machinery. It was leverage. Meanwhile, Angela uncovered more dirt. "They're rushing inspections," she told him one evening, slapping down another file. The county inspector signed off on 3 cabins he never even visited. "It's all rubber stamped. If I can prove bribery, we might have a case." Marcus nodded, but his gaze drifted out the window to the dark shape of the dam. "Do it. But don't count on the law saving us." The hole ramped up too. Security guards patrolled the cabins. Drones buzzed overhead, monitoring the lake. One night, Marcus spotted 2 men in suits parked down the road in a black sedan, just sitting, watching his house. The message was clear. They were watching him, waiting for him to slip. Angela begged him to lay low. Marcus, don't give them ammo. Don't give them a reason to paint you as dangerous. But every nail gun popping across the water was a reason. Every tree cut down, every light glowing in those cabins was a reason. The weight grew heavier each day, pressing on his chest. Finally, a letter arrived from the county. Notice of condemnation hearing. Read dam scheduled for removal pending approval. Angela read it aloud, her voice shaking. They've set the date, Marcus. 2 weeks from now. Marcus's eyes burned as he stared at the paper. That's their final move, he muttered. But they don't know mine. He walked out onto the porch, looking over the still waters of the lake. The cabins sparkled across the shoreline. Their lights reflected like false stars. Marcus whispered, barely audible. 2 weeks. Then the water takes it all back. The night before the hearing, Marcus couldn't sleep. He sat on the dam itself, the thick stone wall cool beneath him, the hum of the water pressing against it like a heartbeat. He thought of his grandfather, hammering nails into the first boards of the spillway. He thought of his father, teaching him to fish at dawn, telling him, the lake's ours, son, because we held on when they tried to take it. And now it had come down to him. Marcus reached into his pocket, pulling out the folded condemnation notice. He read the words again, then crumpled it and tossed it into the dark water below. Not without a fight, he muttered. The next morning, county workers arrived with trucks, chains, and clipboards. Behind them came the HOA, dressed like it was Sunday service. Pearls, blazers, and smug grins plastered on every face. Cresswell strutted at the front, sunglasses hiding his eyes, voice loud and confident. Today marks the beginning of a new chapter for Ashton Lake. Safer, brighter, better. He might as well have been giving a sermon to his congregation of speculators. Marcus stood apart, arms crossed, boots planted. Angela was beside him, her jaw tight. A small crowd of locals had gathered too, watching in tense silence. A county foreman shouted, "All right, folks, let's clear the area. We'll start dismantling the intake controls then." But his words trailed off when Marcus stepped forward, blocking the entrance to the dam's control shack. "You lay a hand on this dam," Marcus said, his voice steady but hard as iron. "And you'll answer to me first." The foreman shifted uncomfortably. "Sir, we have authorization. You got a piece of paper. I got 75 years of blood in this stone. Tell me which one's stronger." The crowd murmured. Phones came up, recording. Cresswell smirked. "Mr. Reed, please. Don't embarrass yourself. You're outnumbered, outvoted, out of time." Marcus's eyes narrowed. Funny thing about time, it always runs out for somebody. Angela tugged his arm, whispering sharply, "Marcus, don't do this. Not here. They want you to snap. That's their play." But Marcus wasn't hearing her. The rumble inside him had grown too loud. He turned, striding to the wheelhouse door. The crowd shifted nervously. The foreman called out, "Sir, step away from the controls." Marcus yanked the door open, revealing the massive iron wheel, old but sturdy, glistening with oil from his careful maintenance. He gripped the spokes, feeling its weight. "Marcus," Angela hissed. "Think." But Marcus's voice thundered across the dam. "You want to take my land? You want to steal what my family built? Then let's see if you can hold it when the water comes for you." Gasps erupted. The whole members scrambled back, faces pale. Even the county workers hesitated, fear flashing in their eyes. Cresswell barked. "He's bluffing. He wouldn't dare." Marcus spun the wheel a fraction. Metal groaned, gears clanked, and a low roar began to build as the first trickle of water surged through the spillway. The sound was ancient, primal, the sound of a force no man could tame. The crowd shouted, some in panic, some in exhilaration. Phones filmed every second. Angela grabbed his arm. "Marcus, stop. If you open it all the way, the cabins." "That's the point," he growled. Across the lake, the shiny new cabins glittered in the sun, smug monuments to the HOA's arrogance. Their decks, their boat docks, their fragile beams, all perched just a few feet above the rising tide. Marcus spun the wheel again. The spillway thundered louder, white spray exploding into the air. The dam trembled under his boots. Cresswell shouted over the roar, "You'll go to prison for this. You'll lose everything." Marcus turned, eyes blazing. "I already lost everything the moment you tried to take it." And with that, he heaved the wheel with both arms. The gates screamed open. Water erupted like a beast unleashed, roaring downriver with the fury of 75 years held captive. The ground shook. Birds scattered from the tree line. The crowd staggered backward, some screaming, some cheering, as the lake surged forward, swallowing the shoreline. Angela shielded her face from the spray, shouting at Marcus, but her words were drowned by the thunder of the flood. Downstream, the cabins never stood a chance. Decks ripped loose. Walls crumbled. Windows burst as water poured through them. The neat little monuments to progress shattered like toys in the current, dragged into the torrent and smashed against each other, one after another. They fell. The whole members shrieked in disbelief. "Our investment. My property. Stop him." But there was no stopping it now. Marcus stood tall at the wheel, soaked, defiant, unflinching as the water roared beneath him. For the first time in weeks, the pressure in his chest broke, not with fear, but release. Cresswell, dripping with spray, lunged forward, face twisted with rage. "You maniac! You've doomed yourself." Marcus met him with a cold stare. "No, I set us free." By the time the gates were closed again, the lake had reclaimed everything. The cabins were splintered wreckage bobbing in the current. The manicured shoreline was mud and ruin. The host stood in stunned silence, their empire reduced to driftwood. The locals began to cheer, wild, raw, triumphant. Some clapped Marcus on the back, shouting his name. Others wept. Cameras kept rolling, every second captured, broadcasted, destined to go viral by sundown. Angela stared at Marcus, torn between horror and awe. "Marcus, do you know what you've done?" He looked out over the water, breathing heavy. "Yeah," he said. "I kept my promise." Sirens wailed in the distance. Police, fire, emergency crews. The battle wasn't over. There would be charges, investigations, headlines screaming local man destroys dam, floods luxury homes. But for this moment, as the sun glared down on the reborn lake, Marcus didn't care. He had unleashed the river. He had reminded everyone, Hope, county, and the world, that some things weren't theirs to steal. The land had spoken. The water had answered. And Marcus Reed stood at the center of it all, unbroken. The water had done its work. The cabins were splinters. The shoreline was ruined. The HOA's dream lay scattered downstream in jagged pieces of lumber and twisted aluminum. But Marcus knew before the last wave settled that the price would be heavy. Sirens arrived within the hour. Sheriff's cruisers, county inspectors, fire trucks. They lined the road above the dam, lights flashing red and blue against the whetstone. Officers moved quickly, dispersing the crowd, pushing reporters' cameras back, stringing yellow tape across the wheelhouse. The sheriff himself, a thick-shouldered man named Fowler, approached Marcus with a look caught between anger and pity. "Marcus Reed," Fowler said, his voice carrying over the roar of the spillway. "You're under arrest for reckless endangerment, destruction of property, and whatever else the DA thinks up before breakfast. Put your hands where I can see them." The crowd booed, angry shouts rising. "He saved this lake. It's his land. Let him go." Marcus didn't resist. He lifted his hands slowly, dripping wet, his face carved from stone. Angela's voice cut through the chaos, sharp and desperate. "Sheriff, you know this isn't justice. You saw what they were doing." But Fowler shook his head. "Doesn't matter what I saw, counselor. My job's the law, and the law says he crossed the line." Cold steel closed around Marcus's wrists. The crowd roared louder. They marched him past the wreckage, down the road slick with mud and spray. Cameras flashed. Voices shouted questions. Do you regret it? Was it worth it? Are you a hero or a terrorist? Marcus kept his eyes forward, his jaw locked tight. Only when he was shoved into the back of the cruiser did he glance out the window, at the dam, at the lake, at the broken cabins bobbing like carcasses. A grim smile tugged at his lips. Worth it, he thought. The jail was cold, but quiet. A concrete box with a cot, a sink, and the faint smell of bleach. Hours blurred. He didn't know if it was day or night when Angela finally came. She looked tired, her blouse wrinkled, eyes red from sleeplessness. She sat across from him, a pane of scratched plexiglass between them. You made national news, she said. The footage is everywhere. They're calling it the Ashton Lake flood. Some people are furious. Some are calling you a folk hero. Marcus shrugged. Folk hero don't mean much behind bars. Angela leaned in, her voice low. Listen, Cresswell and the HOA, they're already filing lawsuits. Millions in damages. They want to bury you alive. But, she hesitated, a faint smile tugging her lips. You've also got allies. Environmental groups. Land rights activists. Hell, even some politicians. They see what you did as a stand against corporate land grabs. Marcus frowned. So I'm either a criminal or a symbol. Both, Angela said softly. Depends who's telling the story. Days turned into weeks. Marcus was arraigned, charged, denied bail. But the tide outside his cell kept shifting. Protests erupted at the courthouse, locals waving signs, chanting his name. Videos of the flood went viral, spliced with old photos of his father and grandfather building the dam. Hashtags trended. #Stand with Marcus and #the HOA. Cable news debated him nightly. Some hosts called him a dangerous vigilante. Others painted him as the last true American farmer, holding back the tide of greed with his bare hands. Even in jail, Marcus felt the swell of something bigger than himself. Cresswell, though, was relentless. At the first pre-trial hearing, he stormed in with a team of lawyers in tailored suits. His face was pale, drawn tight with fury. This man destroyed millions of dollars of property, he barked. He endangered lives. He's a menace, not a martyr. Marcus just sat there, silent, shackled at the wrists. Angela rose, her voice steady as stone. What my client did was protect his ancestral land from an illegal seizure. The cabins that were destroyed were built on contested property my client has rightful claim to. And if the court wants to weigh lives in the balance, perhaps it should consider the environmental impact of the HOA's development, polluting the lake, destroying wetlands, displacing wildlife. The real menace, she said, turning sharply toward Cresswell, is greed. The gallery erupted in applause before the judge slammed her gavel for silence. The legal war dragged on. Marcus sat through endless motions, hearings, news conferences. Every night he returned to his cell, his body aching, his spirit pulled taut. Yet through it all, the lake remained. Reporters wrote about how the flood had cleansed the shoreline, how fish populations surged, how the water ran clearer than it had in years. Photos of the reborn lake filled magazines and social media. Environmentalists called it an accidental restoration. The land was healing, and Marcus knew, deep down, that meant he had done right. Months later, the trial began. The courtroom was packed. Reporters, locals, activists, cameras. Marcus sat at the defense table, shoulders straight, eyes sharp. Angela delivered her opening like a battle cry. This is not just about one man. This is about who owns the land. The corporations who buy it, bleed it, and abandon it, or the people who build it, live on it, and keep it alive. Cresswell sneered, whispering to his attorneys. But Marcus barely heard them. He was staring at the jury, ordinary people, some who had grown up around the lake, some who had watched his story unfold on their phones. He wondered if they understood, if they could feel what he felt when that will turned, when the water roared freer. That night, back in his cell, Marcus lay awake staring at the ceiling. The trial could go either way. He might walk free. He might spend years locked away. But as he closed his eyes, he remembered the sound of the flood, the sight of those cabins crumbling, the lake surging like a living thing reclaiming its home. For the first time in a long time, he felt peace, because whatever came next, he had already won. The courthouse was packed. Not just the benches, not just the aisles. People spilled into the hallway, pressed against the doors, watching the live feed on phones and tablets. National news trucks lined the street outside, their satellite dishes pointed skyward. Inside, Marcus sat in the defense chair, his wrists free for the first time in months. A suit hung on his shoulders, stiff and uncomfortable, but he wore it like armor. Angela stood beside him, papers spread neatly across the desk, her face calm, unreadable. Across the aisle, Cresswell glared. He looked older now, thinner, his expensive suit hanging loose on his frame. Weeks of hearings and counter-hearings had carved lines into his face, but his eyes burned with the same venom as always. The judge entered. The bailiff called for order. Silence fell like a weight. The trial had dragged on for weeks. Experts debated engineering, property lines, environmental law. Witnesses testified. The fisherman who'd lost his dock, the families whose cabins were swept away, the locals who swore Marcus had saved the lake from ruin. Angela had made her case with fire and precision. Marcus Reed did not destroy this community, she told the jury. He saved it. He acted to protect land that has been in his family for generations, land that was being stolen piece by piece. The cabins that washed away were not homes. They were monuments to greed, built on contested property. And while the host sought to profit, Mr. Reed sought only to preserve. Cresswell counted with fury. He endangered lives. He destroyed property worth millions. This wasn't preservation, it was terrorism. If this man walks free, then no law, no contract, no deed will mean anything. Now, all that was left was the verdict. The jury filed in. 12 ordinary men and women, faces tight with the weight of what they were about to do. Marcus didn't look at them. He looked down at his hands, scarred and rough, folded neatly on the table. The foreman stood, a woman in her 40s, steady-voiced. On the charge of reckless endangerment, we find the defendant, Marcus Reed. Not guilty. Gasps rippled through the courtroom. Cresswell's head jerked back like he'd been struck. On the charge of destruction of property, we find the defendant, not guilty. Marcus's chest tightened. The foreman cleared her throat. On the charge of unlawful tampering with water infrastructure, we find the defendant, guilty. The words rang heavy. A mix of cheers and shouts erupted from the gallery. The judge slammed her gavel for silence. Marcus lifted his eyes, finally meeting the jury's gaze. He saw pity in some faces, pride in others. The sentencing came quickly. Marcus Reed, the judge intoned, "You are hereby sentenced to 2 years in state prison, with credit for time served. You will be eligible for parole in 18 months. This court acknowledges the unique circumstances of this case, but it also cannot allow individuals to take the law entirely into their own hands. The land, however, will remain under review pending state determination." The gavel fell. Marcus exhaled slowly. 2 years. Less with good behavior. Not freedom, but not forever either. Reporters swarmed outside. Protesters shouted. Supporters wept. Angela walked beside Marcus as deputies escorted him out. She leaned close, whispering, "You didn't lose." "Not really. They gave you time, but the land's safe. The cabins are gone, and no one's going to rebuild anytime soon. You bought the lake breathing room. Maybe more than that. You gave it a future." Marcus nodded once. Then it was worth it. Prison was harsh, but Marcus endured. He worked in the yard, read books from the tiny library, kept his head down. Word of him traveled, even behind bars. Letters poured in, supporters thanking him, strangers sharing their own battles against land grabs and corporations. One letter stood out, a photograph tucked inside of Ashton Lake, taken recently. The water shimmered blue, reeds waving along the shore. A caption scrawled in pen beneath it. "She's healing. Because of you." Marcus traced the lines of the photo with calloused fingers, a rare smile breaking across his face. 18 months later, he walked out of prison a free man. The air tasted different, fresher. Angela was waiting in the parking lot, leaning against her car. She grinned as he approached. "Welcome back. Read." Marcus squinted into the sun. "What I miss?" She handed him a newspaper. The headline read, "State rules in favor of Reed family HOA development permanently halted." Marcus stared, stunned. "It's over?" Angela nodded. "It's over. The lake is yours again." Weeks later, Marcus stood on the dam, alone. The wheel was rusted shut now, locked under state seal. The cabins were gone, the shoreline wild again. Birds circled overhead, their calls echoing across the water. He closed his eyes, breathing deep. The fight had cost him months in jail, years of his life. But the lake remained. His father's dam still stood. His family's land still lived. And that was enough far downstream, in the towns and cities where people read his story on glowing screens. Marcus had become more than a man. He was a legend whispered in protests, a symbol of defiance against greed. Some called him a criminal, others, a savior. But on the dam, under the wide open sky, Marcus was just a man who kept a promise. And the lake, shimmering in the morning light, whispered back in silence. The years slipped by like water. Marcus Reed was no longer the man who had once stood in chains before a jury. The lines on his face had deepened, his beard streaked with gray. But the fire in his chest, the stubborn, unyielding refusal to surrender, remained untouched. He had returned to Ashton Lake quietly. No press conferences, no declarations. The world had shouted enough about him. He craved silence now. Silence. And the sound of the water. The lake had healed in his absence. The shoreline bloomed with reeds and cattails. Herons stalked the shallows, their wings flashing silver in the dawn. Fish darted in schools where algae had once choked the water. Nature was reclaiming what had always been hers. And Marcus felt a strange comfort in knowing he had played a part. The peace, he knew, was never permanent. One evening, Angela drove up the gravel road, her car kicking dust into the sunset. She found Marcus on the dam, hammer in hand, repairing one of the old planks. "Still working?" she asked. Marcus wiped sweat from his brow. "Damn thing's older than me. If I don't fix it, no one will." Angela smiled, but her eyes carried news.